Hey folks, and welcome to Mindlitter's 10 Things You May Not Know About the 1984 Ivan Reitman film, Ghostbusters. Number 1. Dan Aykroyd came up with the idea for Ghostbusters from his love of seances, which had been a long-time hobby in his family. When Saturday Night Live Downtime gave him a free weekend in 1981, he fused those memories with his love of old Universal monster movies and scribbled the first 40-page rough draft initially entitled Ghost Smashers that would eventually evolve into Ghostbusters. One detail even die-hard fans often miss is that director Ivan Reitman actually lent his own voice to the film's nightmares. The guttural growl and zool voice that erupts when Dana's fridge turns into a doorway to the unknown is actually Reitman snarling into a microphone to save on sound design costs. It's a playful echo of his scrappy beginnings in Canada, where he once shot a $12,000 horror spoof called Cannibal Girls. Reitman's hands-on penny-pinching style is stamped all over Ghostbusters. Columbia Pictures almost had to release the movie under a different title because Filmation already owned the Ghostbusters name, which was the title for a 1975 kids show about two bumbling paranormal detectives and a gorilla. After testing a couple of alternate names for the film, such as Ghostbreakers and Ghost Stoppers, it was determined that audiences overwhelmingly preferred Ghostbusters, so Columbia hurried into a last-minute discussion, finally cutting a $500,000 cashier's check plus 1% of gross deal for the name. Number 2. The Ghostbusters headquarters is actually the combination of two historic firehouses stitched together on film. Street shots feature FDNY Hook and Ladder 8 at 14 Northmore Street in Tribeca, New York, while interior shots, from Egon's cluttered lab to the brass sliding pole, was filmed 2,800 miles away inside Los Angeles' ornate, decommissioned Fire Station 23, a 1910 Beaux Arts gem that locals once called the Taj Mahal of firehouses. Keeping both buildings usable hasn't been cheap. New York City spent roughly $6 million on Hook and Ladder 8's 2016 through 2018 seismic upgrade and modern facilities, and Los Angeles' Prop K program earmarked about $8 million to stabilize and rehab Station 23 for future community use. By contrast, the Ghostbusters crew in 1983 paid just $500 a day to shoot inside Station 23, which is a steal compared with restoration costs anyway. One quirky detail that explains the HQ's distinctive narrow and off-center look is that Hook and Ladder 8 was literally sliced in half back in 1913 when Varick Street was widened, shrinking what had been a large two-door engine house down to a single-bay facade. That asymmetry ended up giving the movie's firehouse its instantly recognizable silhouette, despite that most viewers never realize that it's only half the building that once existed. Number 3. Aykroyd's first draft of Ghost Smashers came in a single caffeine-fueled weekend in the basement of his Martha's Vineyard farmhouse. 40 breakneck pages later, he had Proton Packs, interdimensional ghosts, and the bare bones of a blockbuster. 2 months on, he invited Harold Ramis and Ivan Reitman back to that same basement. The trio spent a focused 2 weeks pruning the spectacle, relocating the action to present-day New York, and shaping the lean shooting script we all know as Ghostbusters. Because Aykroyd devours paranormal journals like most people skim sports pages, he salted Ray Stantz's dialogue with authentic-sounding jargon such as cyclotron resonance, total protonic reversal, ecto-containment grid, and several others. The technobabble wasn't random, however. He pulled it straight from parapsychology papers and fringe engineering magazines, giving the Ghostbusters just enough pseudoscience to feel plausible when they whipped out those ghost-blasting neutrona wands. Paranormal fascination runs generations deep in Aykroyd's family. Seances were a regular fixture at the Aykroyd family farmhouse. Dan's great-grandfather Samuel attempted to invent a medium to commune with the other side, and his grandfather tried wiring a crystal-set spirit radio that could capture voices of the departed. Aykroyd grew up among ectoplasm anecdotes and ghost photos pinned to the fridge, so when Ray geeks out over PKE spikes and full torso apparitions, that is pretty much Dan himself channeling the stories that echoed through his own childhood. Number 4. Aykroyd treated the Proton Pack like a real prototype, creating cardboard and balsa mock-ups in his kitchen with hardware designer Stephen Dane and proudly labeling the business end the Neutrona Wand. His notebooks were full of faux technical buzzwords, ionized plasma cells, harmonic cyclotrons, that gave the effects team a pseudo-scientific roadmap. By the time the fiberglass hero packs rolled out of the shop, every bolt and wire felt like it served an actual ghost-grabbing purpose, even if it was really just movie magic. Those hero packs were real enough for the actors, however, putting plenty of weight on their spines. The main shells were fiberglass over a welded aluminum frame with real military surplus cables and a 12-volt battery tucked inside for the lights. Fully rigged, they tipped the scales at around 40 pounds, fine for a static shot, but brutal for sprinting down Central Park West. So the props department also molded much lighter rubber stunt packs that could bounce harmlessly against the Ghostbusters' backs during running scenes, saving both excessive multiple takes, not to mention potential actor vertebrae damage as well. The blasting proton streams effects were their own art form of sorts. Chuck Gaspar's visual effects crew printed each frame onto oversized cells, then hand-painted orange, blue, and white arcs directly onto the film, sometimes thousands of brushstrokes per second of screen time. They layered animated sparks, feathered glow passes, and streaky motion blurs, rephotographing every frame to marry it back into the live action. No two proton streams are identical, because every swirl and crackle is literally an individual artist's brushmark. Number 5. Harold Ramis didn't pluck the name Egon Spangler out of thin air. He fused two real names he'd carried since adolescence: Egon Donsbach, a soft-spoken Hungarian kid from his grade school classroom, and Oswald Spengler, the brooding German historian whose writings he devoured in college. The hybrid felt quirky yet brainy, perfect for the team's resident gadget guru. Before Ramis ever considered stepping in front of the camera for Ghostbusters, the casting net swept through a number of other potentials who read for the part, each demonstrating their unique characteristics: Christopher Walken's off-kilter intensity, John Lithgow's intellect, Christopher Lloyd's wild-eyed energy, and even Jeff Goldblum's eccentric charm were all tested for Egon. Yet every audition left Ramis thinking, that's not quite the guy on the page. Realizing he'd written a role so specific to his own rhythm, he finally shrugged and said, "I'll just do it." Once on board, Ramis laid down one interesting rule for his character: Egon doesn't smile. He pitched the character to the crew as a New Age Mr. Spock, the analytical anchor who counters Peter Venkman's freewheeling sarcasm. That stone-faced calm, punctuated by the occasional dry one-liner, gave the team its intellectual ballast and turned Egon's deadpan personality into comedy gold. Number 6. Aykroyd first pictured Ecto-1 as a menacing black hearse rumbling through New York's night streets, its purple strobes flickering like something out of a Hammer horror flick. But when the crew film tested it at night, the matte bodywork disappeared into the city's shadows. Cinematographer Laszlo Kovacs nudged them towards white paint, reasoning that a brighter shell would reflect streetlights and neon, and more out of necessity than anything else, the car's now iconic white ambulance look took shape. Ray's on-screen response when Peter asks him how much the car costs, and he replies, "Only $4,800, which sounds like an absurd amount for such an old car in that condition at the time, really wasn't a joke. The prop team scoured LA salvage yards and found a battered 1959 Cadillac Miller Meteor ambulance, which is actually a very rare vehicle, for around that actual figure. The price tag fit the script so snugly that writers kept the number, letting audiences share Ray's pride in the car's purchase, despite it sounding like a raw deal to everyone else. With just 2 weeks to turn the old caddy into a ghost-chasing juggernaut, hardware wrangler Stephen Dane sprinted through Tucson aircraft boneyards and LA's legendary Apex Electronics, yanking radar domes, HVAC ducts, and vintage oscilloscopes to fill the car with convincing-looking props. Even the car's eerie siren is a kit bash. Sound designer Richard Beggs blended a reverse leopard snarl with a slowed-down fire engine wail, giving Ecto-1 a howl that's half jungle predator, half vintage emergency call, and unforgettable. Number 7. Some key roles in the film were written for other actors than the parts were actually filled by. First and foremost, Aykroyd wrote Peter Venkman for John Belushi, picturing his best friend's comedic wild energy sparring with ghosts. Belushi even cracked jokes about a sliming spook over late-night phone calls while Aykroyd was refining his script. Then, suddenly Belushi was gone, dying of an overdose and leaving the role abruptly vacant with the production reeling. Aykroyd and Wrightman pivoted to Bill Murray, another Second City alumnus, whose sly, sardonic style reshaped Venkman into the now well-known laid-back charmer. Winston Zeddemore was originally meant for Eddie Murphy, hot off 48 Hours and Saturday Night Live. The early drafts gave Winston a sprawling backstory and even many of Venkman's best one-liners, but Murphy signed on to Beverly Hills Cop instead, a film that shot at the same time and rocketed him to superstardom. With Murphy out, the script was trimmed and Ernie Hudson stepped in, bringing a grounded, everyman presence that balanced the other characters' zany antics, even though his screen time was scaled down. Louis Tully nearly belonged to John Candy, who saw the nerdy neighbor as a Teutonic eccentric with 2 large schnauzers. Candy pitched the accent, the pets, and a more manic energy, but Wrightman felt it clashed with the ensemble's rhythm. Creative differences stalled the partnership, Candy backed out, and Rick Moranis scooped up the role that same afternoon. Moranis walked onto set, improvised the entire party guest monologue, and turned Tully into the lovably awkward accountant that fans still quote today. Number 8. The containment unit scenes were staged at the aforementioned Fire Station Number 23, just as the other interior shots were. Its massive basement was one of the few available spaces in town tall enough to house the full-size containment unit wall prop and sturdy enough to handle the air cannon rig that blasted bricks and light when Walter Peck cuts off the power, showering the cast in swirling dust and sparks. Prop genius Stephen Dane treated the unit's faceplate like a mad scientist collage. He scoured the same Tucson aircraft boneyards and LA's Apex electronics racks where he'd scavenge parts for Ecto-1, bolting on surplus oxygen bottles, pressure gauges, and hack circuit boards. Each blinking diode and chunky toggle switch was picked more for visual storytelling than realism, but it looked complex enough that the audience would at least somewhat believe this contraption could imprison a massive amount of mischievous ghosts. To sell the tech on screen, Ray's containment unit tutorial for new recruit Winston, in which he describes, insert the trap, set your entry grid, neutronize the field, when the light is green, the trap is clean, was printed word for word in the shooting script. The props team wired every bulb, lever, and bar graph to cue off that exact sequence, so when Dan Aykroyd flipped a switch, a light popped on in perfect time. The result is a miniature masterclass in movie tech illusion, dialogue, actor, and prop all clicking together perfectly. Number 9. Though John Belushi passed away before he could play his part, they still wanted him to be part of the film, in spirit at least, which they did with the party animal of a ghost that became Slimer. Aykroyd and Wrightman wanted to honor their friend, so they turned the most chaotic and uncouth yet lovable ghost in the film into a tribute. Slimer's wild energy, unpredictable mischief, and insatiable appetite were all shaped to echo Belushi's legendary wild persona. So, in a way, Belushi still ended up in Ghostbusters, just slightly more untamed. Creating Slimer was no easy task, however. Special effects artist Steve Johnson was handed vague instructions from Wrightman of make it like Belushi but a cartoony spooky specter. Under immense pressure and a tight deadline, Johnson locked himself in his studio for 48 hours, fueled by coffee, cocaine, and desperation. Out of that haze came the iconic green blob, a wide-eyed, doughy-faced, and completely grotesque creature. Johnson later said he cried when it was done, unsure if he'd nailed it or just hallucinated the whole thing. On set, Slimer quickly picked up a rather unflattering nickname of Onion Head. This is because the physical Slimer prop, a big foam rubber puppet, reeked under the hot studio lights, giving off a nose-pinching funk that cast and crew compared to rotting onions. Puppeteers and camera operators had to work in close quarters with the smelly Slimer prop, which only made him more notorious. The name stuck around long after filming, showing up in the call sheets and storyboards, even if audiences never actually heard it out loud within the film. Number 10. Dane's first sketch of what the PKE meter prop should look like resembled a bulky policeman's metal detector, practical, but clumsy. Wrightman pushed for something smaller that Egon could whip out like a Star Trek tricorder, so Dane trimmed the silhouette, swapped a long pistol grip for a palm-sized body, and added a belt holster. The sleeker design let Ramis flick it on mid-stride, lending spontaneity to those PKE spike moments. Dane started the PKE meter build by cracking open a 1970s Iona shoe polisher he'd found at a thrift shop. Out went the motor, in went small servos, LED clusters, and 2 hinged wing-like antennas that could flutter open like an insect's when the device detected a spook. Once the guts were wired, he sprayed the shell mat black and weather brushed it so it looked like field equipment rather than bathroom hardware. Operating it, however, was a one-man job and required finesse. Ramis memorized the hidden multiple trigger buttons under the hand grip that deployed the antennas and lit the readout. He'd thumb the control just off camera so the antennas spread open precisely when Egon announced a reading. Crew members joked that the meter's spooky precision wasn't special effects at all. It was just Ramis working those hidden buttons like a pro. Well, there you have it, folks. Thanks for watching, and make sure to hit that subscribe button if you like what you saw here. You guys are all great. See you next time.